Hello and welcome back, everyone, to The Doctor Will See You Now, or as we say, the Doctor's here to listen. These half-hour programmes that we've decided on Newcastle Noir to put together gives us an opportunity to probe a little bit more with authors, to hear about their work, and to ask them about the things, the projects that they are into. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce this evening Sandra Ireland, critically acclaimed author from Scotland. Sandra, like many of the authors that we'll be meeting over the next few months, was due to be at Newcastle Noir. And unfortunately, of course, as we know, that wasn't able to be. So we thought we'd do the next best thing and we'd bring the authors here into the consultation room. So welcome, Sandra. Thank you for agreeing to be here with us. You're the author of novels Beneath the Skin, Bone Deep, The Unmaking of Ellie Rook, and the soon-to-be-published novel Sight Unseen.
Yep.
Before you came to be a fiction author and also poetry, I hope we get a chance to talk about that as well. I read that you were a journalist with a newspaper. I also read some fabulous tales of your life that you dropped out from university and you went over to Ireland and had quite an adventure, I think, before returning back to these shores. But I wanted to ask, as I love to ask authors, is what brought you to crime fiction? A journalist, were you already thinking about writing crime fiction, way before you started, or was there a light bulb moment that took you there?
I think there must have been a light bulb moment, and I really wasn't a journalist as such. I was more of a correspondent, and I'm not just being modest, it was a very, very small paper. So I kind of saw a bit of all human life there, if I can put it like that. I used to report on lots of local things, so it was really interesting. But I realised it's quite difficult to be a reporter or a journalist because you've got to stick to the fact. Although, that's open to debate. But I prefer to make things up. So I just was really drawn to fiction in general. Crime really never entered into it. But I do remember when Bloody Scotland first started, and I remember being really interested by this, and I thought to myself, why is it that everybody's so interested in crime fiction? I couldn't quite work it out. But at that time I was writing, but not really seriously. It was only when I went to uni, like my second chance at uni, that I sort of started to find my writer's voice. But even then I didn't really know. Well, that's the difficult part. When you start writing, you don't really know how books are categorized, or that you maybe need to write to a certain market. That wasn't really part of my thinking. And it was actually my agent, Jenny, that says, oh, this is a great psychological thriller. I thought I was really clever writing a psychological thriller. That wasn't my intention, but it just sort of came out that way. So now I read a lot of crime and mainly psychological thrillers, I guess. I like the human aspects of it and why do people do certain things.
Yeah, the why done it as opposed to who done it. Exactly. And there's other strands to your work that I think are absolutely fascinating. I like the fact that you say, that when you begin to write and you begin to find your voice, and do you know where that that work will develop. When you first went to uni, before you dropped out, were you studying English lit?
I was studying history, actually, and it's a funny thing. I wanted to study linguistics, which is quite a weird thing, and I couldn't get into that course. And I'm just fascinated by words, the spoken word, the written word. And I wonder, would life have been different if I got on that course? But who knows? We can't say, can we?
No.
But I didn't. I ended up doing modern history, which I didn't think quite as interesting. And you know, the rural life beckoned. There was a man involved. What can I say? I just went to
Things happen.
Ireland, lived a good life.
But you went back to uni and you went back to study literature and creative writing. And what made you think, I want to go back and do something?
I think it'd always been in my head to go back. At the time, it was the last thing that I wanted, and I wanted to live and do all kinds of things, and I just didn't want to spend time studying. But when I went back, it was a bit of a revelation, and I thought, well, why didn't I stick at this? Why didn't I do it? But actually, you know, people develop and people go in different ways, and sometimes it's just not the right time to do something. So I think for me, when I went back, I was 46, I think. I can't lie about my age. I try, but it doesn't work.
Yeah.
It just felt right. It felt like I was in the right place at the right time, and that's really important, I think. It's a good feeling.
I love what you say about that. I think, in a previous incarnation with students, I always used to think, I'm not sure 18 is the best time for somebody, to embark. And not everyone, I mean, for some people it is right, but for a lot of people, to actually take some time out and come back when you really maybe know yourself a little bit better or know where you want to go. Yeah,
I totally agree. Because studying's hard, and if you're not in that headspace, it's doubly difficult. And I think you really need to be clear that that's what you want to do.
That's right. So now the book out at the moment, but it's soon to be the previous book, which is a lovely thought. So The Unmaking of Ellie Rook, a book that deals with family secrets and lies, and that is, it's not an unusual premise to develop a book, but through that you deal with the subject of abuse and how the effects of that can travel. Were you nervous about approaching a topic like that?
I was in some ways. I mean, my first book dealt with PTSD, so there is always that tension of you want to get it right, and I'm really conscious that books are for entertainment. I mean, they can enlighten us, they can change our lives if it's a good book, but also, we really read for pleasure. So you've got to be really, really careful that you're not putting these subjects out there in a light-hearted way. You've got to be really careful that you're getting it right. And in this case, the book is, well, it's no spoiler to say it's about coercive control, which again is crime, and we don't always think of it as a crime. And it's something that's touched my life, and I know from talking to readers who have read it, it's touched an awful lot of lives, and I'm really glad I've done it. It was difficult to write, but there's nothing that's in the book that hasn't happened to somebody. And I know Margaret Atwood said that about The Handmaid's Tale, and it's true about domestic abuse. Some of the stories are hair-raising, and hopefully, that's not what I set out to do, but hopefully it's raised a little bit of awareness in people that have read it. So
I'm sure it has, and I like what you say, of people responding, having read the book, and saying, oh, it's almost like I read myself on these pages, or you understand.
It's quite humbling, and quite upsetting. A lot of the interactions I've had with people about it. It's very sad.
But I also think, again, to throw people a lifeline and say you're not alone, or someone understands, and I think that can make a heck of a difference. Something that is very typical of your work, though, that you don't stay in, shall we say, the dimension of now. You bring in beautiful strands of folklore or of legend, and with Ellie Rook, you bring to us the warrior queen Fenella. And I wanted to ask, did you find Fenella, or did she find you before?
Oh,
Before
I
you,
like that idea.
before you know, had the idea of the book? Which way around did it come, and why draw on that character?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because I didn't set out to write the book that it ended up being. But the legend of Fenella came to me from various sources. So one was a friend who showed me a Facebook video of two guys rushing around Scotland. I can't remember, it's Undiscovered Scotland or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So they had gone to the Den of Fenella, and it was quite an exciting tour around. There's sort of an old viaduct there, and there's an old Victorian viewing platform, and this huge, dizzying gorge. It's very scenic, but also very dangerous. And I don't think the council quite encourage anybody to go in there, because it is quite a drop. And then almost the same week, I was in touch with an artist who lives in St Cyrus, because the Den of Fenella is just a little bit north of St Cyrus in Aberdeenshire. And she said, "Oh, if you're interested in that, you must come up and see the studio. And I have these woodcuts of Fenella." And they're like huge life-size, well, copies. That the woodcuts were on display in a gallery, I think. But it was very exciting, so I got to unfurl these beautiful copies of these woodcuts, and it was a picture of Fenella leaping the balls, and she was just so strong. This black and white image, and I just thought, yeah, that's the sort of theme I want to go with. It's about strength and knowing that you do have an option, perhaps. Maybe it's not the one you want to take, but Fenella's story is really, really interesting.
Did you have you been inside the den?
Yes, I went there once, and I was very scared. And the path sort of crumbles away, and you get the spray of the water, and I could really picture it. In the book, I've taken a little bit of artistic license, because just to get the geography right and more accessible, but it is quite a dangerous place. I won't be directing anybody to it.
No, health warning, please don't, well, anyway, you can't at the minute, so don't.
No.
But weaving together, a fictional story and then a legend, how do you get the balance? I mean, do you really sit down and think, well, if I put this much here, then I better balance it out there? Or do you just let this tapestry weave itself together?
Yeah, I think you've really got to start with themes in the old story. That's what I did. I looked for what was the story saying to me. But I don't write historical novels. I think people that do are really, really clever, but I just don't have the patience for all the research. But I do love my history, and I think it's really interesting to just sort of like let them sort of weave together. Sometimes it's a wee bit tricky to get the balance right, because you don't want to sort of keep jerking the reader back into the past, or yeah, it's a tricky balance, but it's quite satisfying once you've got the balance right.
Mm-hmm. And if anybody hasn't had the pleasure yet of this book, get it now before the new one comes out, because Sandra takes you on such an interesting journey in and out of that past, and the way you make it relevant. I love the way that you do that. Yeah. But to what's to come?
Yes, it's exciting.
Yes, sight unseen. And if anybody has been on Amazon or has been on any of the pages, where Sandra is to be found, you'll see there's a little strap line there that says, "A Sarah Sutherland thriller." Now, anybody who knows that crime fiction knows that if a person's name is mentioned like that, it's the first of hopefully many. So before we get into the book, I have to ask you, they say psychological thrillers are usually standalones because it's wrapped up at the end and we know why and blah, blah, blah. Why shift, Sandra?
Well, Sarah Sutherland is a very interesting character, and I just wanted to know more about her. and I thought the reader would want to know more about her. She's got a very interesting family life. And when I started writing it, if I could just tell you this bit before we get into the book.
Please do.
I started writing it after my dad died, and I know that writers often have huge problems writing when they've suffered a bereavement. And that actually didn't happen to me. But I was halfway through and I realised I'd introduced a character in it who was just like my dad. And my son has just read it and he said, "That's Grandad." And I wasn't even really conscious that I was doing it. And it's Sarah's father. And he has all the little idiosyncrasies and things that my dad used to say, which was actually really, really nice to write. So he's quite a big part in this book. I don't know where I was going with this, but I just thought I would tell you that.
I think that's lovely. And again, the idea of, a legacy, that, someone's life is captured there on the pages of your book, for
but that's where I was going with it. I just thought the sort of family setup was so nice that I enjoyed it. It is dark and creepy as well, but I thought people want to know what happens to them.
Beautiful, and I love the way you say with such relish, and it's dark and creepy.
Of course.
Because again, if you're watching this and you haven't read Sandra, I remember being blown away by that first novel of, oh my God, this really is creepy. And not to be read, I don't think, before you go to bed. But let me just read the blurb out for sight unseen, if I may. So it says, Sarah Sutherland is a divorced 40-something, caring for her father and leading witchery tours of her hometown. Her evenings are spent exploring the Kilgour witch, who lived in Sarah's cottage way back in 1648, until her execution. Retreating to a world of sorcery, spells, and religious fanaticism, Sarah begins to see new aspects in the tale of the Kilgour witch. Can she right a centuries-old wrong? And what else is her hometown hiding just below the surface? So now, another legend or fictional character. Before we talk about Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about the Kilgour witch and why bring in this aspect to your novel?
Well, I always have a fascination for witches and so-called witches and so-called witchcraft, and very prevalent, of course, here on the East Coast where I live. I live in Canoosti. We've got every town along this coast has had witch trials and the terrible tortures and everything else that go with it. So I wanted to write something about that, and I didn't want to do it too much from a historic, just to give myself a little bit of freedom. I didn't really want to take a historical person. So the witch in the story, Ailey, is actually a sort of fusion of different witches. And I looked at the transcripts of the witch trials and the confessions, and some of them are unbelievable. But of course, we know now that these women and men were under such a lot of stress. They were probably hallucinating. So I took little bits, I sort of cherry-picked little bits and put them all into this one experience to give a witch a voice, and hopefully for all witches that were caught up in those times. And in doing so, hopefully I've given Sarah a voice, because in the present day, Sarah doesn't really know where she's going. So that gives her a focus and opens up a whole new world for her, I think.
And the place where she lives, if this is a fictional place, yeah?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a little secret exclusive. It's kind of Fife direction. But it is fictional.
And without wishing to give too much away, and I must confess I haven't had sight of the book yet, but I am so looking forward to getting into it. By the end of the novel, you say that Sarah's looking to find her way. Is there a resolution to that? Does she, because you're going to take us hopefully into a second book, but is this new, this new heroine, if I can use that word, does she find a purpose?
She thinks she does.
Beautiful. What a tease. I love it. I love it. So the investigation or the research that you did around this, because presumably you were able to travel. Did you travel from place to place, or did you do your research online around these various witches that you drew on?
Mainly online. There's a brilliant museum in Forfar, sorry, which is just about 6 or 7 miles from me, which has quite a lot about the witches. They actually have a sort of a tableau of a witch trial. I went to the National Library in Edinburgh. They have a lot of stuff online, of course. And another interesting thing that I had to sort of research was that Sarah gets her hands on an old journal. I won't give any spoilers, but she has to sort of transcribe this thing to find out what exactly is going on and to read between the lines. So that was really interesting because I had to write it in the language of the 1600s. So I looked up a lot of online journals from the National Library, and it was just very fascinating to look at the concerns of some of these gentlemen in those days, talking about their housekeepers and all that kind of thing. It was quite good fun, but also, you had to pick the best bits and just couch it in a language that would have been relevant to that time.
Yeah. So writing often an unheard voice, but writing a language from the past as well. So bringing those, that link there. So Sight Unseen is due out when, Sandra?
August the 6th, I think. Certainly the first week in August. So so that's going to be fun if we're still in lockdown. So I think it'll have to be maybe a virtual launch or something. So that will be interesting.
Yeah. I do think it's one of these things that at this time, whilst we're not getting out and about, I actually think we can actually reach more people than we would have done in real life.
Very true. Yeah.
I mean, I think the main thing is being able to get hold of books. I know we're able to see authors probably that we wouldn't have been able to see, under normal circumstances. Is it the paperback that's out then, an ebook?
Paperback and ebook, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so even if we're still in I'm especially thinking in Scotland. I know in England, and in the Republic of Ireland, I know shops are hopefully opening up. Maybe in Scotland we can't yet, but if we can still,
we might catch up.
Oh, I'm sure we will, and I'm sure those texts will be there. But in such a short space of time, I think. 4 novels to your name, and other writing as well, but 4 novels. Has the way you perceive yourself and the way you write, has it changed?
I don't see it changing, but I suppose when I get to the end of the book, I think to myself, actually, that wasn't too bad. I think I know more about what I'm doing, perhaps. I remember with the first one, I was all over the place, and I do recognise that in people that tell me, "Oh, I've got to rewrite it, I've got to do the edits," and it is a real undertaking. But maybe I'm just a bit calmer about it now. I think my writing has got more depth now, perhaps. I want to know more about the characters, perhaps. So that's probably gonna. Well, I'm writing longer books. Let's put it that way.
I just think it's fascinating to see how when somebody, the point from which they start, and very often, I like to talk with people who either are emerging or who have just, been published. But for yourself, that's a while back now. Do you consider that you've made it?
No. I've got massive imposter syndrome. And I just think, it could all go tomorrow. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and I mean the imposter syndrome. I think it's important to try and deal with that. But I think the other side of that, to think, who knows how long this may, run. I hope
No.
it's a long, long time. But if we,
Well, you just have to enjoy it bit by bit.
yeah, definitely. I wanted, because I know time, is not our friend for this, but I wanted to turn to some of your non-fiction work. And there was a project, Grist, the life, law and landscape of the Scottish watermill, for which you received a Creative Scotland Award. Could you tell us what it was about and how you got into it?
Well, it was a little bit accidental because I wrote my second novel, Bone Deep. It was centered around an old watermill where I used to work. And obviously I worked for the National Trust for Scotland. I did the guided tours, and I want to say made up the stories, but no, I stuck to the history. But I was very interested in the sort of supernatural side of it and all the anecdotal stories that even a lot of the visitors used to tell me. So I collected them, and I dug a little bit more deeply into it, and I ended up with a book that is about the folklore and stories associated with watermills in Scotland, which is looking for a publisher, by the way, if anybody's out there fancies it.
Please, because I think from what I've read about this work, not had the chance to see it yet, it would be so lovely to see this out there. But yeah, so you associated with that property, you worked there. Um, what what does the landscape, the Scottish landscape, mean to you in all that you write?
Well, I seem to write a lot about water. That has been noted. And I live beside the sea, so it's there all the time, and I just love water. I think I'm a Cancerian, I'm a water sign, so maybe I'm naturally drawn to it. When I worked at the mill, of course, you've got the power of all that water. I find it just fascinating what water can do. Um, so yeah, the landscape and nature is very important to me. I get my best ideas when I'm outside.
When you're outside, yeah. Now, I want to move to another aspect of your writing, and one that I just think is so wonderful. You are a gifted writer, but you share that with other people through the creative writing courses and workshops that you do. Could you give us a little bit of a flavour of what you've been doing and where you're going with that?
Yeah, I just love it. I mean, I love writing, but I absolutely love, I wouldn't say teaching people because it's more bringing out their own talent. So at the moment, I've been doing a lot of courses of my own online, which has been an experience, but a very enjoyable one. And I always feel a bit lighter after doing the little Zoom session like this. It's great. So I've been doing that. I do a course on folklore, which has been really interesting. That's more about just sharing my ideas of folklore with other people, and they sort of come back with the most amazing ideas, artwork, music, poetry is just a lovely thing. And then I'm working at the uni. I do courses for lifelong learning, which of course is very close to my heart. And at the moment, I've just started a course with the uni that's being funded by the Scottish Government, and it's called Upskilling Scotland, I think. And it's their investment in lifelong learning, which is really worthwhile. So people get 8 weeks. I'm sorry it's full, but they might run it again. They get 8 weeks for free. And
Wow, that is fabulous.
We've had a huge uptake, huge response. So that's been me today, trying to get everybody logged on and ready to go. So,
which university is that with, Sandra?
It's the University of Dundee. Yeah.
Dundee, where you're doing that. And I read as well, just before meeting with you today, that the finding inspiration through folklore, I read it was coming in June. So are you doing that in June as well?
Well, I actually started it early because I had quite a lot of requests for it. So I'm now sort of almost finished it, but I think I'll probably run it again in the autumn.
Okay, so if anybody who's watching who is interested in doing any of these courses with you, how can they go about finding the information?
Yeah, they can go on my website, which is the usual letters at the start, sandrairelandauthor.com, and there's a creative writing page on it, and they can go there and they'll be able to get in touch with me.
Thank you. Before we come to a close, knowing that there is a book due out, but always that book was written a long time before we ever get to see it. Are you able, while you're doing, these online courses or the work that you're doing with Dundee, the University of Dundee, are you on with your next novel by any chance?
I've got the second Sarah Sutherland one written.
Yes.
And I'm 3/4 of the way through a standalone, which the idea, this is going to sound silly, but I dreamt the plot, I dreamt the idea, and I just had to write it. It's very dark, gothic, creepy. Goodness knows where that's going to end up, what we're going to do with that one, but I had to write it anyway. And so it's difficult to write. Everybody's saying that it's difficult to write in these circumstances or be creative. It's hard because your mind is all over the place.
Yeah, it is. And knowing, it's like you said, where will this go, and how will it go? Even the whole thing of publishing and getting books out there and people being able to get a hold of books, and that's just the professional side of life, let alone one's own life, family life, all those different aspects. It is tricky. If there were one positive thing that you could maybe identify from lockdown life, is there anything that you've discovered that you've thought,
I'm actually okay on my own. It's hard, but and it's hard for people that are naturally gregarious, and I'm quite quiet, so I am okay on my own. But the one positive is that you realize what's important, and I've been in touch more with my family in the last few weeks than ever before. And even my sons are saying, why do we not always do this? So that's a real positive.
That is lovely. Sandra Ireland, thank you so much for being here with us, and thank you for giving us some insight into your writing and your interests, and we wish you all the very best with Sight Unseen.
Thank you.
See you soon.
And all the best with what you're doing as well. You're doing a great job.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Sandra. And hopefully we can meet soon in real life. Yeah.
In the flesh. Yeah.
Indeed.
Let's hope so.
Bye for now. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.